Hi, welcome back to Waxing On Wednesday, Classic Rock. Another first today, a lot of these this week. Another live album, my first John Mayall album. Moving on. 1972. John Mayall, he'd already put out Jazz Blues Fusion. Did well with that. It was a nice idea. He had his usual jazz band. I mean, he'd been around since back in the 60s, the godfather of British blues, and a lot of great players through his band. He's one of those ones, kind of like Long John Baldry, that, they're known also for the players they've had in their band over time. I mean, he had members of Fleetwood Mac, Eric Clapton. It just goes on. One of these days I'll make a list and just tell you all the great players he's had with him that have moved on, because he was one of those performers. I don't know if he had a lot of hits. Maybe in the early 60s there was a couple of tunes, but he really doesn't get a lot of airplay. He doesn't really have hits as such, but he had some great people going through his bands, and he had some great albums that he put out. This one, like I say, 1972, the first one I picked up, I was well aware of who he was. I'd seen some of his albums. Actually, back in this time, I was in high school at this stage. But whenever we go to the mall, we started having record stores in the mall or some standalone record stores. I would go in, and while I was killing time waiting for my parents doing something, I would start at the A's and work all the way through the whole store. I'd be looking at every album or who the artists were, who they had in the jazz and the folk and the country and the rock, and just go through everything. And again, a lot of these names popped up. A lot of them got me curious. Some of it just because of the album. I'm judging a book by its cover sometimes. But I didn't just go in and look for a specific artist. I would go through and see everything they had in there and see who all these artists were. And again, I was well familiar with what Mayall was putting out. What interested me on this one was the same as Jazz Blues Fusion. He's added the horn section to it. And by this time, I'm also playing trumpet, so I'm interested in the horn stuff. And there's a couple of players on here that I was well familiar with. Let's just go through the artists that are playing on the album. We've got Freddie Robinson on guitar. Excellent player, excellent player. One of the ones that piqued my interest, Blue Mitchell on trumpet. Well-known trumpet player. I didn't have any of his albums. I knew him by name. I knew him from reading about him Downbeat. Wanted to check him out. So Blue Mitchell on here. We got Ernie Watts, tenor saxophone. Great L.A. West Coast sax player. And again, he's another one I was well familiar with. So this album gave me two players that I knew. Blue Mitchell and Ernie Watts. So those were the two that kind of sold me on, let's try this one out first. On bass, we've got Victor Gaskin. Keith Hartley on drums. Charles Owens on tenor, soprano, and flute. Freddie Jackson doing baritone sax and tenor. Larry Taylor on bass guitar, and Clifford Solomon on alto and tenor. And you can see everybody's depicted on the cover. On the back, we've also got shots. Lots of information on there, although it's kind of hand printed. It's tricky to read. Recorded Whiskey A Go-Go in Hollywood, or in Los Angeles. Back in, let me see the date on here. July 1972. Now, this is a hard to find album. I don't see it on a lot of streaming networks. They claim it's kind of a collector's item, so it's a little harder to find. There are hard copies available, but they tell me there was a CD release, and I was reading one of the reviews of the CD release, and they claimed they had a kind of an interview with John Mayall after. And in the CD release, I have not seen this, but allegedly Mayall makes a claim that, yes, they did record at the Whiskey A Go-Go, but the tapes had so much noise on them, they went into the studio and re-recorded everything. And then they added the applause from the audience and that kind of thing in after the song, kind of to put it all together, so it gave that live sound. Nothing on this album that says that. Again, this is what supposedly showed up in a CD reissue. So it may not have been as much of a live album as it was promoted to be. I don't know. Be up to you to figure that one out. I'll tell you, live or not, it was one great album. I'll read off some of the songs. And the problem again with Mayall is no big hits. So a lot of these are not going to maybe ring a bell unless you're following what he does. A lot of the tunes written by John Mayall again. We've got Worried Mind, Keep Our Country Green, Christmas 1971. That was the only one I thought was kind of an odd one to throw in there because other than Christmas time, it's kind of weird listening to that. Things Go Wrong. Side 2 was Do It, Moving On, Red Sky, Reasons, High Pressure Living. And agreed, he lists all the soloists on here. You can see who's playing on there. Everybody gets a chance to stretch out and play some solos. It's just some excellent stuff. A great performer. I've seen him twice live, and he really does captivate the crowd. And what's surprising is, again, and we talked about this with a couple of other artists, for not having any airplay, not having any hits, not having all the promotion that some of the artists get. I'd seen him at a jazz festival, and I'll tell you, he packed the park. These people can draw a crowd. People know about them, and people in the know want to see them play. And he's made a lifelong career of this. I think he's retired now. He's in his 80s. He's not really touring anymore. But he was still packing the place. Everybody wanted to get out and see this band. And again, if you haven't had a chance to see him, you're probably not going to get one now. I don't have a video, which would have been lovely to have. But catch his live performance. Just some excellent stuff here. It's a great band. He does some great writing. He can really cranks out some good tunes, and he does a lot of it. He's got a lot of records out there, so he writes a lot of songs. He's not unlike Van Morrison that way, that they keep putting out albums, keep putting out material, and there's still a market for it. If you haven't had a chance to check out John Mayall before, and you can find one of these, it's a great place to start. Anyways, that was my first start. My first John Mayall album, Moving On. Okay, that's it for Wednesday. I'm working on something special for Friday. We'll see if that works out. I may have to try it later. It's more of a spoken word presentation, but I'll tell you, it'll be well worth it. Once I get this together, you'll want to check that one out. Hopefully we can do it for this Friday for you. Till then, everybody take care. Stay safe. Thanks for stopping by.